You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 67. This is the show where we break down the tech in archaeology and give you our thoughts on how best to use it in the field. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. On today's show, we talk to author Joshua Fairfield. He's got a new book out with Cambridge University Press called Owned, Property, Privacy, and the New Digital Serfdom. Let's get to it. Okay, welcome to the show, everyone. Today we're talking to Joshua Fairfield, author of Owned, Property, Privacy, and the New Digital Serfdom. Josh is a law professor at Washington and Lee University and an internationally recognized law and technology scholar. He specializes in digital property, electronic contract, big data privacy, and virtual communities. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Hey, so Josh, why don't you fill in some gaps in that intro and tell us about what about your past and your experience led to the writing of this book, and then we'll talk about the book.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a pretty mixed, pretty checkered past. Let's see. I suppose one part of it is that I did a lot of development work for Rosetta Stone. My father and my uncle were the founders of the Rosetta Stone Language Library, which is a language teaching software program. And I started there in doing software development and product development. Then, after a while, decided I wanted to go to law school. And what happened in the years afterward was that I found there was a real gap in what people were calling and asking me about, which is whether or not they owned anything in many of these online worlds that they'd begun to care deeply about, versus what the companies were telling them, which is that they essentially had paid a lot of money to own nothing. And that grew over a period of, I'd say, maybe about 10 or 15 years. My career kind of grew, but that stayed constant from, early MMOs, virtual worlds, through games like Second Life and World of Warcraft, ending up in a discussion these days. I do a lot of work about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, but the question remains the same. Do I really own anything when there's nothing tangible for us to touch? What does it mean to own something you can't touch, feel, hold? And that's what led me to write this book.
It's funny you mentioned Second Life. I jump in there probably once or twice a year just to check in and see what's going on over there.
Right.
There's so many abandoned properties over there and things because it's a ghost town.
Right. Well, that's what happens. You get this life cycle of these worlds. Some of the oldest ones are still open, but I drop in occasionally and see how the old neighborhood's doing.
Nice. All right. So tell us a little bit about this book and who you wrote it for. Who's the audience for this book?
Well, I think this book was written for anyone who bought something. And maybe your cell phone, you own something, you buy an app, or you buy a cell phone, or you buy an MP3, or you buy a movie from Google Play, or you buy access to it from Amazon. And then you wonder, do I really own it? Can I control it? Can I keep other people from intruding onto my smartphone, or intruding into my laptop, or monitoring me through my electronic devices, maybe my Fitbit, or in my favorite example, through, I won't say my anymore, but through an erotic massage device where the manufacturer was hijacking the data streams. They were going inside the person's property, and this is the most personal property. Lawyers talk about personal property. This is the most personal property you can imagine. And hijacking date, time, frequency of use, that kind of thing. So for anyone who's got a question about, hey, I paid for it, do I really own it? That's who this book is for.
I recognize your examples from the book. I found that the way that you laid out the story, essentially, of what you're writing about, with very concrete examples that we all know from the news, from our personal lives and such, really compelling. I thought that it was an interesting way to bring in the reader, somebody like myself who doesn't know a whole hell of a lot about law, to bring me along and follow this path that you're laying out as you're telling the story in your book.
Well, I think that's the important part. I wanted to just convince people, not just to educate them. And to do that, you're going to need stories. And when people hear these stories, I think it makes it real for them in a way that this sort of abstract idea, hey, intellectual property licenses have taken over and invaded the Internet of Things and have hijacked our property rights, that doesn't really get your blood going. But when you hear these stories about people whose cars are shut down while they're driving on the interstate, or the guy who had his heart implant data extracted by the police, who then arrested him because he wasn't excited enough during a supposed incident. Those stories really get people engaged.
It's interesting to me. I want to frame for the audience, we're going to talk about, I guess, what this book is about and why you wrote it and things like that as we're doing. And then in the second segment, we'll relate this back to archaeology. So have no fear, this will come back. But it's interesting. I like the personal pleasure device example as an example of this, because very specifically, because I'm kind of a firm believer, and you do get into this a little in this book, but I want to hear you tell our audience about it. If they're taking the data from whatever device, now some people I guess could use things for nefarious purposes. I don't know what that would be in that case, but if they're taking the data in order to make the device better, that's always a common argument that you hear. They're taking the data in order to improve your experience, improve the user experience. It's your personal data, but they're trying to improve your personal experience. How do you respond to that? Because that's usually what you hear.
Right. Well, one answer is that that's simply not true, because it's just not. So look, if they wanted to take the data to improve your experience, all they would have to do is make an enforceable promise, and it would be enforceable under current law. All they'd have to do is put it in their end user license agreement saying, we agree not to convey your data to any third parties. We're simply going to use it to improve your experience. But they're hiding something else behind that, which is that they want to convey this data to other parties. I'll give you a great example of this. Weasel words that got used recently. Roombug kind of got caught out because they revealed that the Roomba vacuum cleaners are mapping your house, and they very much want to share those maps with other commercial parties. They got caught on this, and so then they sort of fostered a wave of blog posts saying, oh, we were misunderstood. We'll never sell the data about the inside of your home. What they meant by we'll never sell it, though, is we absolutely will share it with our commercial partners who very much want to know the shape of the inside of your home, largely because they need to know how to maximize the effectiveness of tracking beacons deployed through your home. So, for example, one common tracking beacon is your smart television makes a high-pitched noise that comes out during an advertisement. Your phone picks that up, and it's an easy way for someone to realize, where you are in the house and what you're actually watching as you're walking through your living room, what you're paying attention to. And you can optimize that by knowing the shape of the room. So that would be one sort of core example of how they want to use this sort of data. The bottom line is they absolutely do not want to just use this to make the best possible experience. Sure, they do use it that way, but that's not the reason for the over-extraction of the data. They're extracting it because they want to advertise with it, and they want to share it with commercial partners who want to advertise with it.
So is the ultimate problem here that they're not asking to do that? They're just doing it? If they asked and we volunteered the data about the inside of our home, that would be generally okay?
Well, asking gets complicated, and when you ask a lawyer, what's the legal standard for contractual consent? What I don't want to do is get up on my soapbox. I'll just tell you, there's an ongoing problem with asking, because the way a lawyer sees, oh, I asked, is by burying the request for your information on page 43 in paragraph 125, subparagraph C. And then what you did, of course, is you said, yeah, whatever, scroll to the bottom and clicked, I accept. Right. Now, really, does that allow me to enforce every single clause in that contract, including some clauses that people put in for a joke? My favorite was a UK firm who put in there, we now can claim your immortal soul. Or another company who was trying to figure out if people actually read these things, put in a bounty, said, look, we'll give you a couple $100 if you just call this phone number. Nice. And nobody called for like months. Or, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts, has said, this is a real problem. law doesn't really know how to handle the fact that nobody reads these things, and in fact, nobody should. It would be a waste of everybody's time and energy for you to read them. And yet people do things like sneak consent to monitor your bedroom, your bathroom, and your living room into these kinds of contracts. We're just going to have to come up with a new way of talking about this kind of consent. We're going to have to route it not through law, but through our devices. Specifically, the way for me to stop people from listening in is not going to be refusing a contract that they present to me, because among other things, I just bought this shiny new device. I powered on for the first time. If I don't hit I accept, the device turns into a paperweight. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to hit I accept in order to use the device I just bought. I think what we're going to have to do is say, fine, the device does listen in on you, but we're going to have to give you the traditional ownership right, the ability to modify it and to exclude others. That's the basic power you get as the owner of something, is you get to kick other people off of it. The sort of typical "get off my lawn" kind of response. And if we can give people the ability to modify, hack their devices in order to exclude these intruding eyes and ears, we can kind of seize the eyes and ears of the Internet of Things and sort of turn those eyes and ears away from us. At least that's my proposal in the book. There are lots of other ways of doing it.
Yeah, I'm one of the worst about that. If there was an app that actually let me scroll faster to the bottom of that agreement so I could hit agree, I would install it, and I would agree to their agreement.
Exactly.
No, I do that at work for people. They need me to install something on their computer, and I do it, and I scroll to the bottom and hit agree.
Right.
They couldn't care less that I'm agreeing to some contract for them. I can't imagine that that's enforceable, but I guess it is.
Oh, absolutely it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now I just willingly gave Apple several models of my face too with this new iPhone 10. So, yeah. Now we're going to bring this back to archaeology in a minute, but this is so fascinating to me because I just want, since I know time travel is not really possible in the way that it is in the movies, and I know that cryogenics isn't quite where it is to quite thaw me out when I want to be thawed out. I want technology to get here as fast as possible, and
yes.
I'm really stuck in a hard place where I also don't want my data just used for whatever purpose. I want to control where that goes and what happens with it. But how do we move forward with this and still see the advances that we want to see in the speed that we want to see them? Because as consumers of technology in the world, almost universally, we all want the new things and we want them now. But well, wait a minute, you can't do it that way. 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 But give me all the things now. Right. And the ways to make those things now and good and a great version 1 out of the box is to get as much data as you can before you start. So, what's the answer here? Give me all the answers, Josh.
Boy, all the answers? I hope you have some time. Let's see. So I think the one thing is that there's a bit of a misconception, especially in Silicon Valley right now, that if they can't take all of the data without properly asking for it, and if they give users controls to really manage the data, not like Facebook controls, which are designed to make sure that you never properly get your privacy settings set up correctly, right? They're quite careful to make sure that, and if you ever do get it figured out, they change them.
Right.
But there's the sort of misunderstanding that giving people the actual ability to do things like turn off the location, the GPS locator on your phone, somehow would lead to the collapse of human machine civilization as we know it. It's just not true. Giving people control actually makes them more confident in using the device. So a recent Pew survey said that something like 90% of Americans feel like their data is being extracted without their permission and being used in ways that they can't control, and they don't like it. I mean, I kind of tie this to the early days of the internet when people really weren't willing to do business online because they were worried about identity theft. They really, you used to sort of get advice, hey, don't ever use a credit card online. Now, these days, that would make no sense at all. We've got pretty solid protections for people who use online payment systems, and people are confident that they can do it. So the internet showed up. It gave us enormous value. We needed to put some protections in place to make sure that people felt confident doing doing that. And I do feel like right now, for very specific reasons of developmental tech, most specifically the fact that we just need epic amounts of data to feed artificial intelligences in order to feed the machine learning algorithms, that there's this broad sense that we should just gather all the data all the time, because then the machine learning algorithm can ingest it, can learn to make more and more eerily accurate predictions. But we're giving up some serious baby with that bathwater, because people are feeling more and more like their devices are spying on them. Even though I'm supposed to own my smartphone, I now have to worry about whether it's listening in on me, or whether or not somebody's turned the camera on, or my favorite, the fact that the government can simply get access to all of our stored text messages if they're not encrypted by just simply going to our provider, our internet traffic, so on and so forth. People are, in a sense, limiting their use of the technology. The technology is getting to us slower because we constantly have to try to do what we can. We're sort of left to our own devices to defend our privacy. And if there were some reasonable rules of the road, we would feel far more confident, and the technology could be put into actual use far more quickly.
Okay. Well, I'm personally not worried about the government, because we know their servers are from the 80s and they're rapidly filling up with Trump's tweets. So
right.
That's superseding everything else. That's got to be archived for the record.
Library of Congress, the tweets. That's right. The tweet section. The tweet archive.
Could you imagine somebody's job is to archive that stuff and make sure it doesn't go anywhere?
Right.
All right. Well, leading up to our discussion that we're going to have in the next segment here shortly, let's talk about big data a little bit, because I know you mentioned that in your bio, and there's a little bit of discussion of that in the book. And by big data, we mean, I guess, when we talk about ownership and we're collecting, volumes and volumes and volumes of data, terabytes of data, petabytes of data, whatever the size you want to use,
right?
And then making inferences from those data and saying, okay, from this I learned this, from this I learned this. How do we talk about ownership in that standpoint?
Well, it's really hard, and in the book I draw a really clear line. I think that for various reasons, it's not possible for us to say that all information about us is our property. Let's try here at my local institution, Washington and Lee. Let's say that students are of the opinion that I'm a terrible electronic commerce professor. So the word's got to get out about that in order for the market to sort of handle it, right? If I'm really bad at it, fewer and fewer students should take my classes. I can't own the fact that I'm a terrible e-commerce professor. I hope I'm not. But if I were, I can't own that fact. I can't assert that kind of control over it. But what we can do is we can own certain kinds of information and certain kinds of objects, like both digital objects and physical objects. So we can reduce the amount of information that the big data algorithm has about us by controlling who can intrude on our smartphone, our Fitbit, our personal erotic massage device, our smart watch, etc. We can limit the amount of data that it can gather about us. And that is enormously beneficial to us, because this data is being used for advertising. That's what they're feeding the machine learning algorithms mostly to do, is to figure out what you'll buy and the most that you'll pay for it. It's kind of, if you're trying to negotiate, if you're going on Amazon, you're trying to buy assets, and they know everything about you, one of the things they really are trying to predict is how much you'll pay for it. And so it's kind of like playing economic poker with somebody who can see your cards. In that sense, it's really useful to be able to tell your devices, you work for me, not for them. Knock it off. Stop gathering all this data about me to feed to the algorithms, because then the algorithms know a lot less about you, and you're able to do what economists call get more of the consumer surplus, instead of them extracting the maximum that you would be willing to pay for it. Instead, you pay a little bit less than the maximum you'd actually be willing to pay, which means that you're pretty happy. You feel like you got a little bit of a good deal, instead of every deal being, I paid the absolute maximum that I'd be willing to pay. So I think that's the basic part of it, is that we can own smart devices, and we can own digital objects like movies and music. Those are things that are similar to other things that we own, but we can't own all information about us. The best we can do is control the devices that are spying on us so that we don't have all that data to feed to the algorithms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a great place to stop this segment. We're going to come back in the second segment and relate this back to archaeology and the way we work in the field. In the meantime, check out arcpodnet.com/members. Give us all your data and we'll send you a t-shirt. So that'll be great. We'll send you a t-shirt and a coffee mug if you just give us all your data about yourself and then pay us every month. All right, we'll be back in just a second.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our future online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
Okay, we are back, and we're going to now take this conversation in an archaeological turn, as we should. And just to help frame the conversation a little bit, so Josh, we as archaeologists traditionally, we record information and quite often, up until maybe even just a few years ago, that was almost exclusively on paper. We collected information about people. And I think when you talk about a data security sort of thing and ownership and things like that, when we're collecting information on paper, site forms, reports, things like that, that's easy to just hand back over to somebody and say, here, we gathered this information. You, as the owner of the property or the cultural property, like a Native American group or something like that, you can have all these boxes of paper that we collected and recorded.
Right.
And there you go. But nowadays, my company is completely digital. We record everything on iPads. Everything goes into the cloud after that. And then if somebody were to actually say, well, I want all the data you've collected, it's nearly impossible for them to actually get that. They can legally enforce me not using it, but it's impossible for me to actually give them that because there's realistically copies laying all over the place. And to take that a step farther, when we talk about ownership again, archaeologists are inadvertently taking physical things and putting them into the digital world. For example, if you drop something on the ground right now, it's your piece of trash, you used it. Let's say you drop your cell phone on the ground right now. And in 50 years, if the laws don't change, I'm going to record it as part of an archaeological site. And I'm going to learn everything I can about it. And right now, we use instruments to dive inside of archaeologists. People use all kinds of machines to see what's inside these things. What are they made of? All that stuff. Well, when we get into the digital age, who's to say we're not going to have a way to just crack open that iPhone and see what's in it digitally that remained after 50 years of sitting on the ground in the desert? Who owns that information? Do you still own it if you're still alive? Or, how do we work out these questions? Are these questions we're going to have to work out and try to answer, I guess is my bigger question on that. Or is it something that we're kind of letting slide right now?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question, because this is the same question that sort of dogs law, right? Property is easy as long as it's physical, as long as it's something you can see and touch. But as soon as we start talking about having property interests in things that are intangible, suddenly courts tend to lose the plot. They understand it for certain things like your bank account. You can't touch that, but it's clearly your property. Or your stocks and bonds. You can't touch them, but they're clearly your property. Or even the ownership interest in your house, right? That's actually just a piece of information filed at the local county courthouse. So this relationship between information and property, I think, is at the center of a lot of what we do that's as close as possible to archaeology. In legal cases, often we're trying to reconstruct events, situations, contexts, and we're going to go deep into the evidence. We're going to go into the objects, but then we're also going to be mostly interested not in the objects at all, but in what the objects mean, in information about the objects. That's going to be the source of the forensic analysis, as anyone who's watched one of these, sort of infinite CSI shows can attest, right? What you're interested in is the information about the objects. And I think that's a place that law and archaeology have a deep commonality. We've traditionally focused on physical stuff. Our interest has always been in information. And the rules, as you suggest, the rules about who can control or who owns that information once it's been freed from physicality, that's not at all clear. And that's one of the major reasons why people have gotten away with so much in terms of getting onto people's digital and smart property, because we don't have clear rules. We do have clear rules for my lawn. Get off it. We don't have clear rules for my smartphone, right? It's not easy for me to say, get off my smartphone the way I can yell, get off my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's real interesting because we do have cases throughout the past. This is why we have NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Repatriation and Protection Act. That exists because Native Americans wanted their things returned back to them or not affected at all. And it really, they had to start somewhere. So the logical place to start was with graves and grave goods, right?
Right.
But in reality, if you work on actual tribal land, tribal property, and you do some sort of archaeological survey or excavation or something there, the property owner, who in this case would be the Native Americans, they have ownership to all those things. So if you're turning in a report to somebody else or whatever, all the artifacts, all the data analysis goes back to them. But that's not always the case in all circumstances. Like I work a lot on public land out here in Nevada, where it's just the quote government that owns the land, but there's sometimes dozens of tribal groups that claim ownership over the land from an ancestral standpoint. So we record this information and they're all screaming for it, but nobody has a legitimate claim to it as far as the law is concerned. You know,
we also have the clear issue, especially with Native Americans in the U.S., about issues of consent. So
yes,
who has consented to revealing certain data? As archaeologists, we might excavate a grave, for example, and really want to take DNA from it, from the bones in it, or we might want to do microscopic analysis of the teeth to get a sense of what the food sources were. But the person, this is a skeleton. It used to be a human being, has never, ever consented, never had the opportunity, and didn't know we're going to come around 2,000 years later to analyze them. So it gets into some ethical issues as well that I don't know that there's a clear legal way of answering, but there is in the case of NAGPRA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's interesting that you would mention DNA. I find a strong parallel there between, so as a recent development in legal forensics, which is not at all the same discipline as archaeology, but uses a lot of the same techniques and has some of the same goals. There's been a wave of people who have been freed from prison because their DNA proves that they are innocent. There's been a whole range of these innocence projects that have cropped up because we've done these tests on their DNA, and it just absolutely shows that they were not the perpetrator. But here's the thing. More and more, the kind of evidence that would show that you're innocent of the crime might be entirely digital. It might be the GPS location information from your phone, which shows that you were at Dairy Queen at the time of the incident, right? It might be Vanguard style data taken from license plate readers as you were driving down the road. One guy proved his innocence because he could show that he was at home posting on Facebook at the time of the incident. So what we're beginning to do is care about digital artifacts in a way that we've previously reserved for caring about DNA evidence.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Paul, I think some of this kind of leads into what you were saying on the break about artifacts. Speaking of artifacts, do you want to kind of bring that up again and frame it?
Yeah, well, it kind of strikes me listening to the conversation here that archaeologists traditionally are almost like the bad guys in this, like the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples, in that we are used to extracting information sometimes without consent from our subjects being the people in the past who left the archaeological evidence for us. But what I was talking about at break was just that reading the book, again, fascinating. It was pulling me through. I kept on coming back to this notion of property and how property law has gotten, I don't know if corrupted is the right word for it, but it's how I kept on feeling like it with intellectual property and copyright law. And as archaeologists, we're trained in dealing with objects and dealing with materials. All the data that we deal with start with material, physical objects, and then we're used to extracting those. And then we've gotten to the point in the field where it's no longer good enough just to get the fancy statue, the beautiful pot from an excavation. We now care much less about the physical object as we do about the information that we can extract from that, particularly contextual information, where it was found, what site, what level, which grave, on and on. And this has been a progress over, 150 years of our field. But to me, just it was an interesting counterpoint. Maybe I'm not sure if counterpoint even is the right word, but it was an interesting contrast to the way that the legal definitions of property, especially as they affect our devices now, have changed over the last 30 to 40 years. The time frame that you mostly cover in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. One, of course, major difference is that the people who generated the information in the archaeological context weren't, for the most part, weren't doing so with an idea toward monetizing that information much later on. Whereas software developers build software in order to get data that does help them build an empire, make a profit, however it is that you're likely to do it. And that's one of the reasons why maybe we haven't seen the same corruption in archaeology as we've seen in intellectual property, where the rules of intellectual property get expanded and expanded and expanded until they've essentially taken over. One story from the book is how John Deere, the tractor company, has essentially told farmers, "No, sorry, you don't really own your own tractors. You're merely licensing the software inside them." And that's kind of where we are now, where the intellectual property is everything, is what, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these modern tractors or one of these modern harvesters. It looks like Darth Vader's bathroom. I mean, it's just amazingly complicated. But you need software to run it, and the thing's essentially a brick without the software. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, at least in the property context, things have gotten so badly out of control, is that the manufacturers are using intellectual property in order to for a specific profit agenda. I wonder, maybe the goals of people who are trying to control the information attached to archaeological artifacts might be quite different. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were opposed to monetization, if they had other goals for the sharing of that data other than to turn it into a positive stock price movement.
Well, see, that's the interesting thing about archaeology is there's plenty of people trying to illegally monetize, but they don't think they're doing it illegally. You get so many people that are metal detectorists, and I'm not going to slam metal detectorists right now because there's a lot of people that are doing metal detecting ethically and in the right circumstances. But a lot of times they're just out there in a field, especially on the East Coast where it's Civil War. There's been people there for several hundred years with their metal objects. They're pulling stuff out of the ground. And there's not even a thought in their head that they can't just take that, put it in their pocket, and take it home. They don't think they're stealing. They don't think they're doing anything. They just literally think that nobody owns it. And that's a huge problem, I think. And I was thinking about that as we move further and further into a time period where, like I mentioned before, I don't know if you're aware of this, but anything over 50 years old is our cutoff date. Typically, as a cultural resource management archaeologist, we record everything over 50 years old. So as we start having things that are more digital that are 50 years old, if somebody hasn't, I guess, claimed digital ownership over that for a really long time, can an archaeologist come along and record it? And what does that even mean? Who owns that if it's just sitting out, let's say, on the internet and nobody's claimed it or paying for it, or it's on a server somewhere and we find it and now it's an archaeological site?
Right, absolutely. Or, I'm sure that certain famous people's smartphones are going to be of enormous interest in a few decades.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how to answer those questions, quite frankly. And I don't know if anyone's even trying to really answer them, because we're still trying to answer, like you said, what do we do with our smartphone? I mean, even just the most recent case of the shooter in Texas, there, again, the issue's coming up that they can't get into his phone. It's completely locked down,
Right. Right.
So,
And the question of who owns that sort of thing is going to be a direct interface between my discipline and yours,
Absolutely.
right? Because the person who's going to claim ownership of it is going to be the heir of the estate of the original person that owned it. They're going to assert a property claim, and they're going to assert that against the argument that this is now in many critical ways in the public domain, that this is a matter of history, of archaeology now. It's not a matter of personal property ownership. And those two claims I would expect would come directly into conflict. If your great-great-grandfather's cell phone surfaces and you would like certain family legends to not kind of be brought out into the public sphere, I could imagine direct kinds of conflicts, especially given the methods that we need to get into these devices, which are often password permissions, often other permissions that courts have held do pass on to the heirs of the estate under certain circumstances. We saw this in the Gulf War, when soldiers would unfortunately not come back, and their families would make claims on their social media accounts as property of their son or daughter that passed to them under the doctrines of descent and distribution, under the will, essentially.
right. Does that work? Like with social media accounts, have they changed their license agreements to say that works? Or
well, so interesting. There was basically a big fight. The social media account said these were just contracts between them and the person who had passed away. The family said that this is property that passes to us, and many of the different social network sites like Facebook actually worked out kind of a half and half deal. Where they would say, first of all, we would let you give your passwords to someone under digital legacy. They're actually digital legacy companies that hold the keys to these things so that they can be passed on to your family. But also then they do things like have these in memoriam pages or these remembrance pages that they've worked up. And they've also got a system for maintaining Facebook accounts of some people who have passed away under kind of a guardianship that sort of one person acts as a curator of another person's account. They kind of drew up what they thought their customers would want as sort of a hybrid between you own it and yet the person just simply has a contractual right to it.
Wow. That gets complicated.
Sounds like it's going to get more complicated really fast.
Yeah, don't die. Basically, that's not don't die.
Yeah. So in the last few minutes here, without giving any specific legal advice, of course, what is a direction archaeologists could go with all this digital information that we're recording? We have to put it somewhere. I think people are wanting to record things digitally because they know paper isn't the way to go anymore. What can we do? Where can we put it? What can we do with it? What kind of formats can we put it in, or something? I don't even know how to ask the question to help protect it, I guess, from people who shouldn't see it or steal it.
Let me just add on to that doctors are covered under HIPAA laws, right? That what they can and cannot reveal, and to whom they can and cannot reveal it. Archaeologists oftentimes are legally required to give certain information to certain people and prohibited from giving it to the general public, for example. So I think that there's probably a certain amount of case law out there already that would cover us, even if it's maybe seen as less critical as people's health records.
Right. This is a bit of a technical answer and legal answer, but I think it's super important because it ties together a bunch of different ideas that we have talked about over the past bit. So one thing you can really do is get people to sign up. People don't care about revealing half their information to Facebook anyway. There's no compelling reason why people can't sign up now and say, you know what, it's fine with me if in the far, far future my information is of archaeological interest, go ahead and use it. And there's a way to record things like that permanently that ties into another set of things that I talk about in the book, which would be one of the cryptocurrency blockchains, like the Bitcoin blockchain. It's possible to write certain kinds of information into these blockchains, and it can never essentially come back out of that blockchain. It's recorded permanently. It's as if there's another strata. They actually use the technology that works almost in a geological sense. what happens is your statement that you wrote to the blockchain gets layered under different layer after layer after layer of cryptography until it becomes indelible, it becomes immutable, and no one can get it back out. And the second thing that this responds to in terms of recording people's consent and in terms of being able to reveal certain kinds of information and not other kinds of information is that encryption does a great job of letting you selectively reveal information. And here's why. You can put information into these public blockchain databases, and anyone can verify that that information is true. But without the relevant cryptographic keys, they can't necessarily see the underlying information itself. They can see that what you're stating is verifiably true. In the case of Bitcoin, it would be that, Mary gives a Bitcoin to Fred. They can see that that's true, but there's certain elements of the transaction they may not be able to see because they don't have certain cryptographic keys. And there's a great experiment that's running right now in Delaware in which they're melding public and private records in the same distributed database. Some of them are available to be verified by the public, and some of them are entirely intended for the company or for a select sub-audience that need access to it. And that's perfectly possible to do. So I think one thing that we might be able to do is just kind of like the SETI at home initiatives where people download a sort of a little thing to run on their home computer that helps with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence or whatever, is to enlist people's interest in signing on and sort of becoming the archaeological equivalent of an organ donor. Just sort of check the box, and it's fine with me if my information gets used, and that permission gets recorded in a permanent cryptographic record, almost like recording their permission in a permanent geologic record. And then anyone who comes along later and examines the blockchain of the early 21st century is going to be able to verify that that person had given consent at that time.
It's interesting that you brought up blockchain. I'll just mention there's an organization that I'm still trying to work out how we're going to interview them, but it's called KAPU, K-A-P-U, and it's an archaeological coin, basically, and it's developed around blockchain, and they're trying to get this off the ground right now, presumably to secure data in exactly the way that you just said.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I had no idea they existed, but 2 thumbs up.
I didn't either.
There's this designed at the moment to specifically to protect artifacts that we know of, right? To give a ownership.
I think so.
And to try to tamp down on looting and the illicit antiquities market. So it's not looking forward like your proposal is, but the whole notion of blockchains for helping archaeologists is actually kind of current right now.
And there's no reason that you couldn't record. You can record whatever you want in hashed form on a blockchain. So there's no reason you couldn't record those forms of digital consent at the same time that you're recording a sort of a public supply chain of artifacts to make sure that these things don't just go missing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we are just about out of time. Josh, is there anything that you wanted to mention about the book that we didn't get to ask you about?
Gracious, I think the basic. I think you've asked me pretty much everything that we've found worth talking about. Let's leave it there before I get up on my law professor soapbox.
Sounds good. I was asking you for closing remarks, I guess. Is that what it's called in a courtroom?
Right,
I don't even know.
Right.
Anyway,
close it out.
Yeah. Close. Yeah. So, okay. Well, thanks for joining us, and be sure to pick up your copy of Owned from Cambridge University Press via the link in the show notes, and that'll be at arcpodnet.com/archaeotech/67. Thanks, Josh, for coming on the show.
Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you find yourself wondering what the latest tablet or smartphone could do for your business? Wonder what GPS to pair with your device? Just trying to figure out how to go digital in the field without breaking the bank and or making a bad investment? Or did you find a technology company to work with but just aren't sure the questions you need to ask during the initial conversation? Well, you're not alone. There are literally thousands of tech combinations out there, and it can be really tough finding the right one for your business and your workflow. My name is Chris Webster, and I've been working in CRM since 2005, and I've been a tech enthusiast my entire life. I spend my time trying to figure out how to make archaeology more efficient both technologically and financially. No one is going to give you a big pile of money to do whatever you want with, so you have to make the most of what you have. The right gear can mean the difference between zero margins on that next project and an employee benefits package. That's where DigTech Concierge comes in. Let us be your technology guru. Whether you have just a few questions or want us on retainer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, we're here to help. With years of experience, tens of thousands of acres of survey done completely digitally, and many, many people trained, DigTech is your tech BFF, just waiting to guide you through this process now and through the inevitable changes to come. Should you hold on to those tablets or upgrade? What about the new operating system? Will it crash your apps, or can you go ahead and do it? We know the answers and can guide you to a profitable year. Go to www.digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge to book a consultation or book us for the year. The yearly retainer includes unlimited calls and support and company training on software and gear. That's digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge. And concierge is CONCIERGE. To get going and go digital today. Call us before you make any decisions. We've been there before. Okay, we are back, and this is the App of the Day segment, the App of the Every 2 Weeks segment. And I'll kick it off. I was just kind of looking around. I actually found, I don't know how I saw this, but I saw a website just a few weeks ago that had, hey, here are some great apps that are usually pricey or cost something, but are now free. So I was like, all right, that sounds great. Let me check that out. And I checked out this one called, and it was written by people from Thailand. So some of the language in there is, written by people from Thailand who English isn't their first language. So take that with a grain of salt. Usually when I see an app like that, I'm like instantly questioning it because I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit racist. There's developers in other countries and they're putting stuff out, but sometimes I don't know what it is, but I see some
very good ones, in fact.
Some very good ones, right? So anyway, This app is called Safety Photo Plus Video, and it's photo with the plus sign video if you're looking for it on the App Store. And this, unfortunately, is only available for iOS. And I looked at the price, and it was a B with a line through it and 69. Turns out, I was like, 69B, what the hell is this? Turns out that's Thai Bots, I think it's pronounced, BHATS, which is about $2. So the app is probably $199. I did the conversion right now. It said $208. My guess is it's $199 in the App Store. Unfortunately, I should have wrote that down the minute I downloaded it because it said free on my side. And then once you own the app, unless you sign out and go to the App Store, you can't actually see how much they cost because it says just open because you already own it. Anyway, what this is for, speaking of data security, I thought this was a good one to have on today's episode. You open the app and it instantly asks you to set a passcode for the application. And the interesting thing about that is this is one of the really kind of neat things that I've never seen before in an application. It asks you how you want to set the passcode. You can use a dial like on a safe or like a combo lock. You can use a dial like that to set a 4-digit passcode. You can use a pattern. So the way a lot of Android phones open is, you just run your fingers across the numbers in a certain pattern. Or you can just do your traditional keypad passcode lock. Now, one thing I did try is I just typed in 1, 2, 3, 4 on the dial, and I did 1 going to the right, 2 going to the left, 3 going to the right, and 4 going to the left. And then when it asked me to confirm that password, I just did them all to the right. I just did 1, 2, 3, 4, and that still worked. So really, it's just looking for the numbers, and I think they could have added another level there, but actually making it like a combo lock and making it sure the direction matters.
1, 2, 3, 4. That's the same as my luggage. Oh, come on, Spaceballs reference.
Excellent. I love it. I know you got to have a Spaceballs reference. So anyway, there's 2 ways to get photo and video into the application. And first off, it has a couple default albums on there, and you can create your own album. And then you can put another level of security on there. You can add a passcode that's different from the passcode to get into the app into that album. And it asks you which of the 3 methods do you want to use. So it sounds like you can create any number of albums and have different styles of passcodes and different passcodes on each one. So the way that you add stuff into it, though, is a little weird. You're probably going to be, tempted to just import photos from your camera roll first and put them in there. While you can do that, you can bring stuff in. One of the weird things I noticed about it is it doesn't actually let you see the entire camera roll, only the stuff that you've already put into albums, which is a little strange. I'm not sure why you don't have access to the whole camera roll, but it's only the stuff that you've actually put into albums within your camera roll on your device. But then confusingly, probably because it doesn't have access. Once you bring that into the app, it doesn't actually delete it out of your camera roll. You'd have to go back then and delete it out of your camera roll to have it actually be secure within that application. And but the other way you can do it is you can just take the photos inside the app, and it has a fairly rudimentary camera. So if you're looking for a bunch of bells and whistles, you're not going to get it. But if you were just taking all your pictures, like let's say you're out doing site photography for archaeological sites, you could create a new album for each site if you wanted to, and then just drop all the pictures within that album. Again, this is really kind of rudimentary. I'm not actually even recommending this. I'm just pointing it out in case somebody finds it and they're looking for a secure way to secure like sensitive archaeological data, but in the realm of photos and videos and things like that. I think the best thing to do, honestly, is just have a passcode on your device, because as the FBI finds out every time we have a mass shooter incident, nobody can get into that. They have to hire like high-level hackers, and no one can get into the passcode on your device if you make it secure enough, or you have a fingerprint ID, or you have faceprint ID on the new phones or something like that. That's probably good enough. It's not something I would worry about. So anyway, they've got a free version, and then they've got a pro version. The pro version more than likely just removes ads. It doesn't look like it adds any real functionality. They have in-app purchases, which usually that's just remove the ads for $2, $1.99, something like that. But that's pretty much it. There's a number of apps out there like that will help you secure things within the application. But I would just caution you to, like all password situations, don't go crazy with coming up with a whole different passwords unless you've got some sort of password convention you can remember, or some sort of secure password manager that you can store that stuff in. And I'm also not sure if this will, because of the unique way that they have you input the password, if a password manager would even pop up as an option for inserting that password, like 1Password or something like that, if that would actually activate within that application. I don't think it would from the looks of it. So anyway, that's my app. It's called Safety Photo Plus Video, available for iOS, and it's about $2. So, that's it. Paul, what do you got?
So what I've got is it's a Mac app. The name has app in the name of the website. So even though this isn't an app on your device, I'm still going to say that it's okay here. It's called Spectacle. The website is spectacleapp.com. It's Mac only, though I'm sure there are similar ones to this on Windows and Linux. And basically what it is, it's a window organizer. So I'm a heavy user of multiple spaces on my Mac. That's the Mac OS name for virtual desktops. So, I'll have one program on one desktop, another program on another desktop, another program on another one. But sometimes I want multiple windows from multiple apps, or even multiple windows from the same app, all visible on one screen. And, you can move your windows around and resize them to fit. But with Spectacle, if it's running, you set it up to launch on login, and it gives you little glasses up in your menu bar, and you can then choose to move the currently active window either to the left half of the screen, the right half, bottom half, top half, thirds of the screens. You can center them, full screen them, upper left corner, whatever. You can assign hotkeys to those. So currently, I'm talking about this because I'm actually using it right now. I've got, I opened up a couple different web browsers. I've got Safari and Chrome open, and I also have Slack open. And so the main information I wanted was going to be in Safari, so I pushed that to the left half of my screen. Slack, I didn't need so much. I just wanted to see what was at the end, so I pushed that in the upper right. And then Chrome, where we're recording this segment, is down in the lower right, so I can see all these things laid out, and it's just a couple keystrokes away. There are a number of different Mac apps that do the same sort of thing. Probably the best known one is called Moom, M-O-O-M. But Spectacle is really nice in that it's free, and also the source code is up on GitHub in case you're interested in seeing how they did it or possibly improving it yourself.
Wow, that's cool. I've heard of apps that do that before, and just today when I post a podcast episode, I have to have 4 different windows open, and they're all Safari windows. And I usually, when I'm on my multi-screen display, I'll have all 4 of them open at once. And I'm meticulously, for some reason, I spend a lot of seconds of my day trying to make sure that the window is exactly half of the screen, and then then I open a new one, and when it's off by just a few millimeters, oh my God, it just irritates the crap out of me. So take those seconds every time I do that.
Yeah, it does me too. It's really, really feeds my OCD to try to get something just perfect. So this is a very quick and easy way to get it to pixel perfection, middle of the screen.
Nice. And I think that might seem a little bit frivolous to some people, but if you are constantly, I'm constantly doing that, and I'm constantly reorganizing my stuff. And if I were to be able to take away those seconds, aggregate it out over the course of the year, that probably saves me a lot of time I could spend, making another cup of coffee. So, and that's way more important.
Yeah, for me, it's not so much the time saved; it's just the organization. It allows me to really quickly and easily lay out what I want to work on right now. So I still use it side by side with the virtual desktops with spaces, but it then becomes each screen is its own project. It's all self-contained. Everything that I want to see is right there, visible and quickly, easily accessible.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. Well, I think that's about it then. That's it for this episode. Again, check out the links in the show notes if you want to grab a copy of Owned. It's actually a pretty easy read. It's a good book, and the first few chapters, I will tell you, will scare the crap out of you, and you'll go around turning things off probably in your house. However, it all kind of comes around. I don't want to. It's not too scary. So.
No, well, we didn't bring this up, but he ends the book with laying out what he envisions as a new way of viewing property and ownership, hence the title of our devices and our data on those devices. Mm-hmm. And so it ends actually on a positive note, but it starts out scary, gives you a history of how things got scary, and then tries to work its way through how to unscary them.
That's right. How to unscary them. I like that word. That's good. Okay. Well, that's about all we've got this week. Join us next week, and we'll bring you some more great podcasts. Thanks a lot, Paul, for being on.
Thanks, Chris.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.